Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Sigma 28-105mm f2.8 DG-DN Art, a high-end general-purpose full-frame zoom with a bright aperture. At the time I made this review, it was available for Sony E and Leica L mounts, but fingers crossed for more systems in the future. Announced in September 2024 and costing around $1,500 or £1,400, the 28-105 2.8 continues Sigma's strategy of tweaking traditional ranges to offer unique zoom and aperture combinations. Most obviously, it extends the long range of their existing 28-70 2.8, while adding the quality of their Art series. Like the 2870, it also offers an interesting alternative to more traditional zooms for those who don't need wider 24mm coverage. For example, it reaches 50% longer than a 24-70 2.8 and is twice as bright as a 24-105 f4. Again, it may lack their wider 24mm coverage, but by starting at 28mm, it can come in smaller, lighter, and cheaper. I know we'd all ideally like a 24-105 2.8, but the only one so far is Canon's RF version, which is 300 grams heavier and costs twice as much. Okay, now the scene's set, let's see what the lens can do in practice. Sigma loaned me a pre-production sample in the L mount, which I tested on Lumix S5 II and 2X bodies, but my optical results equally apply to the Sony version. Oh, and this video doesn't have a sponsor as, well, I don't think we should put them on every single review. What do you think? Physically, the 28-105 2.8 may be smaller and lighter than Canon's 24-105 2.8, but it's still a substantial lens, 88mm in diameter, 158mm long, and just a few grams shy of a kilogram in weight. You certainly know you're carrying it around, so if you'd prefer a lighter 2.8 zoom, consider Sigma's own 24-70 2.8, or their 28-70 2.8, which is even lighter still, and I've got separate reviews of both of those lenses if you're interested. The build quality is excellent though, with weatherproof construction that includes sealing at the mount. Closest to the mount end of the barrel is an aperture ring, labelled between f2.8 and f22, with an A position for body base control if you prefer. A switch on the side allows you to declick the aperture ring for smooth and silent adjustments, while a switch on the opposite side of the barrel will lock it in the A position. Next comes the ribbed zoom ring, which adjusts the focal length with a roughly 90-degree throw. Zooming it to 105mm extends the barrel by about 40mm and it turns smoothly with nice resistance. A switch alongside the zoom ring can lock it in the 24mm position to avoid the barrel extending, and you can disengage this with a twist of the ring. Sandwiched between the zoom and focusing rings are an autofocus manual focus switch along with a pair of focus hold buttons. And finally there's the generously wide ribbed manual focusing ring, which turns very smoothly with nice damping. Like most autofocus mirrorless lenses, this is a free spinning and motor assisted manual focusing ring. And at the end of the barrel is an 82mm filter thread along with a bayonet mount for the supplied lens hood. Sigma also includes a padded case for the lens, although like most of these it can't also accommodate a body that's mounted to the lens at the same time. Okay, now for the optical range, which I'll demonstrate while filming video on the S5 II. Now it may miss out on 24mm, but 28 can still capture a wide enough field of view for most landscapes and interiors, while the long 105mm end allows you to get comfortably closer than a lens that stops at 70mm. Note that there isn't any optical stabilisation on this lens. Now for focusing, starting with the lens at 28mm 2.8 and the camera using a single area. Here you can see the focusing is quick and accurate. Note that I'm filming the back of the camera here, as some Panasonic bodies do reduce their autofocusing speed for photos when connected to an HDMI recorder. Next for the lens at 50mm 2.8, again in AFS mode with a central area, and again the focusing is quick, quiet and accurate. And finally at 105mm 2.8, where I've also moved a bit further away, where the focusing remains fast and precise. So when mounted on the S5 II here, I'd be happy with the focusing performance for stills. I'll show you face focusing later. But first a quick video test, again with the bottle and starting at 50mm 2.8, where the camera and lens are smoothly refocusing from near to far and back again. As you can also see, there's minimal focus breathing. And at 105mm 2.8 from a bit further away, again refocusing with only occasional hesitation. You can also get an idea of the kind of shallow depth of field that's possible at the longer end of the range here. Next, for the optical quality, and to test the lens, I've angled the view of Brighton Pier so that details run right into the corners. As always, these outdoor tests do take more time than photographing a simple charter at home, but I do think that real-life results from a distance subject are a really important test in any lens review. So here's the 28-105 at 28mm 2.8, and taking a close look in the middle shows a very good degree of detail. Stopping the lens down to f4 boosts the contrast and improves the sharpness a fraction, but I'd certainly be happy shooting wide open and adjusting the contrast in post if necessary. So now back to the 2.8 version before heading into the far corner. Here you'll notice the details remain pretty sharp, although there is inevitably a little darkening due to vignetting. Close the aperture one stop to f4 and most of that darkening is lifted, while the details enjoy a small boost in crispness. Closing the aperture further only makes very minor differences, so I'd say the lens is looking very good when wide open, but it's worth closing a stop for the best results if you don't need the shallowest depth of field. Next for the lens, roughly midway through its range at 50mm, again with the aperture wide open to f2.8. Looking closely in the middle of the frame, where the lens was focused, again shows very good detail and contrast, although both can enjoy a mild boost if you're willing to close the aperture to f4. At this point the lens is close to performing at its best, so there's no need to close it any further, unless for depth of field or exposure reasons. So it's back to the f2.8 image before heading into the far corner. In the extremes you'll notice a little softening of the finest details and the inevitable corner darkness due to vignetting. Closing the aperture one stop to f4 brings mild improvements to both, but it's not until you're at f5.6 that the corner detail becomes maximised. So I'd say it's fine to shoot wide open if your subject is away from the extremes, but for the best quality across the frame, aim for f5.6. And finally at the longest end of the range at 105mm, again with the aperture wide open at f2.8. Taking a close look in the middle reveals excellent detail which bodes well for portraits. Stopping down may bring fractional benefits to the pixel peepers out there, but I'd say the lens is already performing close to its best, at least in the middle at 105mm when wide open. Okay, so it's back to the f2.8 version before heading into the corners. Here you'll see a mild reduction in crispness along with the usual darkening from vignetting, but the lens is still pretty well behaved here. Closing the aperture lifts that darkening, but the actual recorded detail remains roughly similar. So overall the zoom is performing very well with a distant subject close to its best even when wide open. Next for portraits and presentations, starting with the lens at 28mm 2.8. This is ideal for environmental portraits where you can see more of the surroundings, and by starting at 28mm it's possible to mostly avoid the barrel distortion of wider lenses, even as the subject moves around the frame. Meanwhile at f2.8 there's some separation from the background. Now for the lens at 50mm 2.8 where the view is noticeably tighter, allowing you to better concentrate on the subject while also enjoying shallower depth of field effects. Now 50 is of course a standard focal length, and this test proves that you may not actually need or want any more blurring in the background than f2.8 is giving you here. And finally at 105mm 2.8 where the background is much tighter still, really focusing on the subject. And even though I've had to stand further from the camera here, which in turn has brought me closer to the back of my garden, you can still see that it's possible to achieve substantial blurring with the aperture wide open. And just briefly, here's a still taken at 105mm 2.8, showing the amount of detail that the lens can capture. So from these tests you can see how the 28-105 range is useful for portraiture and events across a variety of distances and compositions. To really see the quality of the background blur though, it's time for my bokeh ball test, starting with the lens at 28mm 2.8 and from the closest focusing distance to the ornament. This close distance allows you to enjoy some blurring in the background even at wide angle. The blobs look a little sliced off in the far corners, but begin to become more rounded as you close the aperture down. For more blurring and bigger blobs, just zoom the lens in, as seen here at 50mm 2.8 where the difference has become quite dramatic. The blobs look pretty well behaved here too, with minimal outlining or textures within. There's still some of those sawn off shapes in the extremes though, and to avoid them across the frame you'll really need to close the aperture down by a couple of stops. And finally at 105mm 2.8, again from the closest focusing distance where the background blobs have become larger still. Again they're pretty well behaved, but for more rounded shapes you'll need to close the aperture down a little. As the aperture is closed further, you may notice the 12-bladed aperture system mildly imparting its geometric shape onto the blobs, but I'd hardly call it distracting. And at the other end of the aperture range, here's an example of the diffraction spikes that you can expect with the lens at 28mm f2.8. The 12 spikes give this effect symmetry that you won't see on diaphragm systems with odd numbers of blades. And for my final test, a ruler photographed with the lens at 105mm from its closest focusing distance, where it's delivering a fraction over 100mm across the frame, although at f2.8 here the edges have become quite soft. Gradually close the aperture down and the edges do improve a bit, but even at f8 they remain soft, indicating that the field isn't particularly flat at the closest focusing distance. Not a problem if your object isn't occupying the whole frame, but it is worth noting. Which now brings me to my final verdict, during which I'll share my usual selection of sample images taken with the lens. The Sigma 28-105 f2.8 Art continues the company's policy of complementing traditional ranges with lenses that offer something a bit different. The 28-105 may miss out on the wider coverage of a traditional 24-70, but reaches twice as far at the long end. And while the 24-105 f4 again starts wider, Sigma's new zoom is twice as bright. Indeed, the only lens that gives you the full 24-105 range with a constant 2.8 aperture is Canon's RF 24-105 2.8, but it's larger, heavier and twice the price of the Sigma. Ultimately, we're sport for choice, and today you really can cherry pick your ideal combination of range, aperture, weight and price. Now normally I'm a big fan of the 24mm focal length, but in practice I didn't actually miss it when shooting with the 28-105. I found the range of the new Sigma to be very flexible, and I appreciated the extra reach over a 24-70. Meanwhile, the optical and build quality were both excellent in my tests. The only downsides are the fairly hefty size and weight, but that's to be expected for this range and aperture, and again it is more compact than Canon's 24-105 2.8. It also costs a little more than Sigma's Mark II 24-70 2.8, which also performed very well in my tests, while additionally starting that bit wider. It's an excellent choice for the money. So again, you're going to have to weigh up all of the factors in order to discover which spec will suit you best, but it is nice to have another option out there, not to mention one that is so far unique. And that's it for this lens review. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, especially your ideal zoom range and aperture. And if you did find this review useful, please do consider giving it a like and my channel a follow. It's very much appreciated. As always, the latest pricing is in the description, so it now only leaves me to thank you for watching and to bid you a fond farewell. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.